Supply chains are complex, and securing your software supply chain is no exception. From the huge number of components and dependencies that you use from a wide variety of sources, to your developers adding their own code, to your applications being delivered to users around the world. How do you keep track of all this? At Anchore, we believe that managing and protecting your software supply chain starts with establishing trust. And that trust begins with understanding and managing your software bill of materials, or SBOM. SBOMs function as an ingredients label for software. And when you track and manage the ingredients, you can trust the components you use or bring into your development pipeline. It starts with verifying the provenance of open source code and validating supplier SBOMs, and keeping a repository of SBOMs to track the ingredients of your software over time. And maintaining trust as you build, with continuous automated security that uncovers vulnerabilities, malware, and leaked secrets, with compliance checks to root out any critical issues. Then, when you're ready to deliver your software, providing SBOMs and continuing to monitor for security risks after deployment, so your users can trust you and rest assured that the software you deliver was built securely every step of the way. To learn more about Anchore's software supply chain management solution, visit us at anchore.com.
Hi, everyone. Welcome today. Today's expert webinar series, Solving Real-World Challenges in FedRAMP Compliance. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump in. All lines are muted. Q&A will be held at the end, so please put your questions in the Q&A panel that you see on the side of your screen. You will be sent an email follow-up afterwards with a recording of this session along with the slides. And if you see any questions pop up throughout, please do answer them. With that, I'd like to introduce your hosts today. We have Mike Strohecker with InfusionPoints Cybersecurity and Neil Levine with Anchore. Gentlemen, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I am Mike Strohecker, Director of Cloud Operations here at InfusionPoints. Essentially, I'll give you a little background about InfusionPoints and about myself. InfusionPoints, we are a 2LA accredited third-party assessor organization with FedRAMP. We've been in the FedRAMP space for many years now, really since its inception, since it derived from FISMA over to FedRAMP. We've worked with many CSPs of all different shapes and sizes, and continue to navigate. What my team does with the cloud operations team is we work in the POA&M development, the continuous monitoring perspective, kind of the nitty-gritty day-to-day tasks that are, monthly deliverables that are required to go to the PMO's office. So that's a little bit about me and InfusionPoints. Neil, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself now or if you want me to go through my slides first.
No, I'll say hi, and then I'll step back to let you present. Hi, Neil Levine. I run product management at Anchore. Hopefully, many of you know Anchore is a software composition analysis product, and we help with federal compliance. So I'll be talking on the second part of the presentation about how Anchore can help you with your FedRAMP challenges. But no, I'll let you kick it off. Thank you, Mike.
Sure, thanks. All right, so in starting off, I just want to kind of go over a little bit of FedRAMP and the SSDF background. So as many of you know, as we transition from Rev 4 to Rev 5 with FedRAMP, there are some requirements here, right? Most everyone knows you're going to have to scan all your operating systems, all your web applications, all your containers, all your databases. You're going to have to do network scans. You're going to have to scan APIs, many different scans have to take place. One of the additions to Rev 5 is you now can no longer just use a CIS level 1 benchmark scan. You have to go to STIG if it's available for your operating systems. You have to supply monthly compliance scans to the FedRAMP PMO and integrate that into your POA&M. Again, that has to be done monthly, and the raw scans have to be updated or uploaded to Max, formerly max.gov monthly for FedRAMP. The you also have to meet your compliance scans from a CVE perspective, right? So all those databases, you're going to be scanning with um, whatever tools you're going to use. Anchor, you're going to use your dynamic and your static scan tools. So there's kind of a little background about what's going on with Rev 5, with some of the common challenges that I'm seeing. Some of the bigger challenges that I'm really seeing with some of my customers right now is with scanning the containers. Container scanning is a really big question mark that a lot of the customers have in building those SBOMs for the container scans, the compliance checks for the container scans, what it means to publish from dev into production. And hopefully, once we're done this presentation today, you guys will have some good answers around that. That's kind of the goal of what we're trying to get to here. So with that said, I'm going to walk through kind of a timeline here of what brought us um, to where we are with this, the SBOM requirement. So, it really started with some high profile supply chain attacks, right? You had the SolarWinds attack back in 2020, you had the Kaseya attack in 2021. And really that prompted an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. And what that put in motion was it really put some timelines in place um, for NIST to develop a framework here, right? And a method for the government to really know, what open source packages and libraries and things that are going to go end of life, what practices are the CSPs and cloud service offerings that we're using, what practices are they following? How do we know that they're secure? So that prompted NIST Special Publication 800-218, which you may or may not be aware is this the software, the Secure Software Development Framework. Um, uh, so the Secure Software Development Framework came out, which then prompted an OMB memo, which was, it's kind of the teeth, right? It's the enforcement. It's saying, hey, we have to enhance this. It's the directive coming from the OMB that requires the federal agencies to follow the secure software development framework. When many of you may have gotten requests from your federal agencies after this OMB came out, saying, hey, I need an SBOM now, I need to know what all these libraries are. And it sent a lot of people scrambling because there really wasn't any automated tool to do it. People really only had manual processes. We know what operating systems we were using, but we may not know all the intricacies of the packages and libraries and open source items that may be going end of life as part of that operating system. And sometimes it's really hard to tell, and it's hard to dive into from a manual basis. So after that OMB memo came out, and they had the teeth now. Well, now CISA published in March, in early March, a portal to upload these artifacts. Now, these artifacts could either be by form of a self attestation, or companies could have a 3PAO come in and upload these artifacts to the site. But most everyone that's in FedRAMP, you would have received something from your agency, your authorizing official, or the JAB that would have said, hey, you guys need to upload to this site, so that we can meet this OMB memo to 2218. Moving on, I do have some SSDF best practices here. So diving a little bit more into the SSDF and kind of what it means. Most of y'all are familiar with FedRAMP. I like to compare the SSDF practices to FedRAMP, right? Like there are really four main categories, or I'm going to call them control families here, which is the terminology that most of us are used to speaking to with FedRAMP. You have the prepare the organization, you have to protect the software, to produce well secured software, and then to respond to vulnerabilities. And those are some things in the second part of the presentation that Neil's going to get into, is like how Anchore can help meet some of these requirements in an automated fashion, that can hopefully lift that burden off of y'all. But really, as part of the SSDF, all the cloud service offerings had to come through, and they had to look through how are we meeting each of these controls. And again, as of right now, there is a self-attestation you can do to say we're meeting it. I fully anticipate this to go to more of a 3PAO doing it. As many of you know, with FedRAMP, with Rev 5, there is supply chain risk management controls in there now, but that really points to these practices and tasks that are part of the SSDF. And I'm sorry, I forgot to change the slide. So I was speaking to it. So this is the actual slide I just spoke to. My apologies. So those are the SDF practices that I was just speaking about. Now, there are some tips that we kind of have for filling out the attestation and artifacts if you're going to do a self-attestation. So again, we're going to recommend that you automate, low-level artifact generation, through that static scanning. As we already spoke to, there are some challenges here with doing that with the containers. But it's also to help safeguard, existing processes as much as possible. But you're also going to need to have a process in place to manually create any other artifacts that you're not able to automate, right? With that said, about the low-level artifacts, the recommendation from the government is that they want to see high-level artifacts whenever you upload to them. So you're required to keep those low-level artifacts to remediate and meet all those secure software development framework requirements, but they want the high-level artifacts. So they're going to want to see, this is the library, this is the end of life. They're not going to want to get into all the other nitty-gritty, and this is the asset that it's affecting, right? You guys are going to need to keep track of the nitty-gritty through your CI/CD pipeline, but that's kind of some tips we have right there for that piece. As far as the SBOM piece, as many of you have already seen, federal agencies are already requiring this. DoD agencies have been requiring this for a while. Whenever you get into the DISA IL4, IL5 space, FedRAMP is requiring it now. There was a release that they put out just the end of last month, where they have best practices that they're pointing to the executive order that I referenced already, 14.028, as well as the OMB memo and the Secure Software Development Framework. And essentially, it's I'm going to quote from it. It's like FedRAMP authorized cloud service offerings should be capable of generating an SBOM for third-party components in the production environment. And then it references those memos. Although ideally, SBOM should be supplied by the publisher of the software, it still falls on the shoulders of the cloud service offering to provide that to whoever their authorizing official is through FedRAMP, is essentially what they're saying. So that really helps highlight some of the big challenges that we have seen with the SBOM generation. And many of my customers have come to me saying, how can I automate this? As I spoke about previously, it's easy to see when CentOS is going end of life or Amazon Linux 2 is going end of life. But what about OpenSSL? What about a Java library or something like that? These kind of unknown unknowns. So that's where automated tooling comes into place. And for the automated tooling piece, that's really where I'm going to throw it over to Neil. And hopefully Neil can talk through how Anchore and their automation can help solve some of these problems from an automated perspective here.
Thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, so picking up the sort of key themes from Mike's comments here. One is SBOM is now a new concern for people focusing on FedRAMP certification, and automation is really the key for sort of addressing not just the SBOM issue but a bunch of other challenges that FedRAMP can throw up here. So I'm going to cover just step back a little bit and make sure that everyone's situated within the FedRAMP process and where Anchore sits within that, and then we'll build up, show you how all the automation addresses all the requirements within up to V4, and then we'll talk a little bit about SBOMs and V5. So just as a reminder, the FedRAMP process is hopefully folks are familiar with it. Well, not hopefully, but I'm sure people are familiar with the long process around a FedRAMP certification. So typically, once you've engaged with a 3PAO, or firms like Mike's, you've done your assessment, you've worked out what your trying to achieve in terms of the level you're trying to go for. So typically Anchore will be involved around step 3 in this process, which is around the implementation and the design and the overall workflow and processes that you're going to be putting in place here. So this is where we can come in, and look at your environment, advise on how to instrument all the automation that you really need to have in place to not just meet the initial assessment, but critically to meet, as you can see here, number 9, the continuous monitoring, which is often the thing that people forget about until they're in a race to get to the initial milestone. But it's a continuous monitoring, which is often where the large amount of the burden comes after you've achieved certification. So when we focus on sort of containers or cloud native applications specifically, which is where Anchore is focused, there was a lot of confusion or challenges with people trying to understand how the FedRAMP controls apply to containers, given that containers are immutable infrastructure. The content is published in a slightly different way to virtual machines and managed in a slightly different way to virtual machines. So there was a bit of confusion in the early days of FedRAMP when it came to containerized applications. But now it's fairly well understood that there are 6 major areas, and number 6 is an important number. 6 major areas around hardened images, your pipelines, vulnerability scanning, registry monitoring, production sensors, and asset management. So there's the 6 areas of FedRAMP which apply to containers, and which Anchore is designed to help you with here. The second area that when we got involved with FedRAMP was around, again, the sort of the POA&Ms, or the plan of actions, how you actually are going to respond to issues and remediation steps around that. So again, ensuring that you have automation to help you manage and generate these POA&Ms, track them through so you can provide the evidence to the 3 PAOs and so on, that you've got plans in place to address that. And then finally, as we mentioned before, the continuous monitoring, how you keep updating your assessment of your environment, be able to produce on spec information if you need it, but also more importantly, just how to actually address real world issues as they come up. Log4j obviously being the canonical example of something which scared a lot of people who had FedRAMP certification and how they had to respond to that. So Anchore Enterprise essentially does 5 areas, or 5 things we can provide to help you with the 6 areas of control. So 5 for 6 is the shorthand to think about. So we can automate the scanning, we can automate the detection of the SBOMs and the content within them on an ongoing basis here, not just for vulnerabilities, but for malware, secrets, as you'll see, also configuration and other aspects. So as the automated scanning, which is the first thing that Anchore really helps you with. The second thing is the automated controls. Once you have this information, how do you automate the assessment of that state against the controls specified by FedRAMP? So Anchore has a policy engine which allows you to sort of automate the assessment of the controls. Automate the reporting. What is the current status of the environment? How do you generate that proof on an ongoing basis? Again, we have a reporting engine which will have the automated report generation for you to provide, not just to the accreditors, but also the actual security teams who have to respond to the issues. Continuous management of the exception process for the POA&M. So again, automating a process, as we'll see in a second, how you respond to these issues. And then finally, and it's blocked off on the slide there, continuous monitoring, how we automate the ongoing assessment. So 5 areas of automation for the 6 areas of control. And so that 5 for 6 is what we're going to go through. And so with the rest of the slides we've got here, we're going to go through some of the specific details we have here around the 5-step configuration we have for these 6 areas of controls which are listed here. So the first one, and often the one which is the most vexing for a lot of folks, is actually hardening images. Oops, let me go back there. Is hardening the images, and this is typically shorthand for STIG. So we have a companion set of tools which are paired with an Anchore Enterprise environment to help you get the STIG assessment up and running. So we can, with our STIG tools, STIG checker is a sort of the collective term for it. The STIG checker tool will allow you to instrument compliance violation checks at the build time, so doing that in the CI pipeline and scanning the registry, as well as actually looking in the runtime, which is obviously the more important thing to get the green light. So images on the left for look for violations, runtime on the right for look for as close to a pass as possible. The STIG checker will pull out all that information, put it into a storage environment. You can keep it local or host out an S3. And then we have again a companion tool that sits alongside Anchore Enterprise, which will allow you to browse the output of those results, pull out the reports either for remediation if it's on the left-hand side or for proof if it's on the right. So STIG is the first of those sort of 5 checklist items that we have. The current tool provides coverage for a variety of operating systems and runtime environments. We are aiming to harmonize these so the lists are equivalent on both, but for right now we have sort of a large range of operating systems supported on the static scan, which will implement in CI. And then we have a collection of runtime profiles for the the major applications, but look for additional profiles coming from the left-hand side to the right-hand side to get it into parity here. So hardening images, area number 1, step number 1. Second on our 5-step configuration is this policy bundle. So you've hardened your images or looking for violations on the left, but you also need to do the vulnerability scanning and the malware scanning, the secret scanning, the configuration checks, and so on and so forth. So that's the sort of second area. And Anchore provides an out-of-the-box policy pack or policy bundle, which collects all of the formal controls against the content that you're scanning. So as you can see on the left, the policy pack formally enumerates what the control definition is, and it will then apply these checks as you're doing your CI builds, or as you push something into production, it'll scan at this for the same policy rules. So all of this works out the box. It's got it all very explicit. So if something fails, you can see which control fails. More importantly, if it's all passing, you've got an explicit list of the controls to put into your documentation to send to your out via your 3PAO. So the FedRAMP policy bundle is the heart of the operation process around all of the scanning capabilities and scanning requirements. An additional thing that's now available in our policy system here is also the introduction of the KEV data. So KEV is the known exploited vulnerability list, which is curated by CISA, the US government agency, and essentially is a list of vulnerabilities which are actively seen in production out in the federal government. So CISA collects these reports. They then publish the information about what they're seeing out in the wild. So this is now part of FedRAMP. You have to ensure that you're using a KEV list. It's to help you prioritize, but it's also to help you see that there are different due dates for resolving these issues, typically as a government agency, but also for FedRAMP. If you see these things on a KEV list, it basically bumps up the priority of trying to fix things independent of the vulnerability analysis you may have done previously. So KEV, part of FedRAMP, now part of Anchore Enterprise, that data flows down into your Anchore Enterprise system through our standard vulnerability feed service, alongside the vulnerability data you're capturing from NVD, GitHub, the various language ecosystems and so forth. So again, FedRAMP policy bundle gives you access to all the FedRAMP controls, but also the CISA KEV data to help you manage your vulnerability management. As you can see here, very simple policy rule example of like, if there's a vulnerability which is on the KEV list, stop, fail, don't pass the policy. Okay, step number 3 is generating the reports. So we've hardened our images. We have step number 1 with the STIG stuff. We've now, step number 2, we've done the scanning. We've got the analysis of everything that's in our builds, what's passing, what's failing. You now have to generate these reports to get out of Anchore into the hands of your assessors or your security team. So again, focusing on automation, we have automated STIG scans, automated scanning. This is automated reports. So here, like the policy bundle, we have out of the box reports, which you can use to generate data. either against images in a registry or against images in a Kubernetes cluster, for example, your runtime assets. So pick the sort of the results you want to get. Is it just a list of vulnerabilities, or is it the overall policy evaluation, depending on which workflow you're working on, fixing things versus proving evidence. So you can take the vulnerability list against the registry, the vulnerabilities against your runtime, or the policy against your registry, or policy against your runtime. Out of the box report, all there ready to go. Critically, and this is the automation piece, you can schedule these reports to be published on a fixed cadence, as well as ad hoc, but you can fix it on a weekly basis, daily basis, what have you, and have it go to the appropriate team, either as a manual artifact, which they can receive in their inbox, or as a machine readable set of data, which you can publish into third-party systems if you want to hook this up into other workflow tools, whether it's Splunk, ServiceNow, Elastic, or so on. Okay, so number one, hardened images. Number two, automated scanning. Number three, automated reports. Now we'll talk about how you can automate some of the plan of action, the POA&M responsibilities you have as part of FedRAMP. So again, plan of actions is what you're doing in response to these issues here. So in common with most security tools, Anchore has an allow list system. Importantly, you can define different allow lists for different environments, or different different registries, different production cloud systems, or even different teams. You can have, if you've got FedRAMP low, FedRAMP high, you might have different plans of actions based on these different environments you're having here. So these allow lists allow you to group this sort of the plans where you've decided, look, we're going to allow this for various reasons, document whilst you're doing that. Critically, on the automation side of things here, we have the time-based allow lists, or allow lists which are expiring. So this is not the list per se, but the entries in the list, whereby you can, as you add that vulnerability and document what it is, you're approving, so there's a GitHub vulnerability which is surfaced. You can set an expiration date for that and say, we're allowing this for 14 days or for 30 days, what have you, which allows the software to be published. It's not going to block on the publishing of the content or the running in production. After the time expires, after the 14 or 30 days expires, it'll stop that, fail the compliance check effectively for that piece of content for that software. So again, these time-based allow lists allow you to sort of automate your POA&Ms, as well as allow you to export all of the list of exceptions you've granted or remediation steps you're following up on. All the data is stored in the system. Again, you can get to it programmatically through the API if you need to generate that into an Excel spreadsheet and so on and so forth. Additionally, you can also automate these allow lists and remediation steps. If you in an external system, this is implemented as policy as code. So if you want to store all of your POA&Ms essentially in GitHub, have that drive Anchore underneath, or multiple instances of Anchore, then that's also a workflow that's supported. Okay, to close up the 5-step checklist, and then I'll talk about SBOMs, which is the ongoing, how do you automate the ongoing monitoring of your registry or your production environment here. So when you configure Anchore to scan a repository or a registry and a repository and associated tag for your cloud native content, you can choose to automatically check for updates. So as new content is published, as you're iterating through your software versions that are going out to your your SaaS products, what have you, we can automate the discovery of that content either on a whole registry or an individual repository basis, or a simple tag, depending on what your registry sort of practices are. But we can scan that content and pull it in automatically. Critically, we can also constrain that to say, look at the Kubernetes or ECS or what cloud, whatever cloud environment you have, look at the content that's in that environment to get a continuous update of what is running in production, and then scan the content in the registry based on what we're actually seeing in production. So That way you have either a complete set of everything in a registry, or you can narrow it down to just the content you have in production. And typically, 3PAOs want to see a bit of both. They want to see your production status, but they also want to see your total set of assets that might be pushed into production that are sitting within, say, a FedRAMP environment here. So combination of runtime inventory plus the registry, a subscription service allows you to sort of have this continuous ingestion of data from all of these different systems. Okay, so we've captured, the 5 checklists that we get customers to run through in order to address the 6 control areas around FedRAMP. So to bring us back to the beginning where Mike was talking that about how the SSDF that's now manifested itself in a new NIST standard around how does this impact your FedRAMP work, and the big one is around SBOMs, and this has become critical of late. So Anchore at heart is an SBOM generation and management system. That's how we perform all of these functions. And so as part of any piece of content where you're pushing into the system from a CI job, or we're pulling in from a registry, or we're detecting from a runtime inventory, we have a detailed SBOM of everything inside that application stack. And whether that's operating system packages or development and application packages, or even just levels of individual files which are uploaded, we have that complete catalog for every single artifact stored in the Anchore database. So a very, very deep, rich set of SBOM data that's already in the system. So it's already automatically generated every time we're pulling from the registry or CI or runtime. So you can actually get that content already. So we support our own native SIFT format, but naturally for FedRAMP, they want to see some standards. So SPDX and CycloneDX are the 2 main standards for SBOMs. So for individual artifacts, you can pull down the SBOM, get the either the original copy in the SIFT format or the formatted for the version for the SPDX or the CycloneDX schema standards. So all of that is there. Again, you can automate the extraction of that by just hitting the API, putting it down every time you publish content or you're requested to generate it. The last area here, which is particularly useful, is that when being asked to give SBOMs out, typically what people want to see is actually the SBOM for the application. Then typically they don't know what are the individual images or containers that you're publishing. That tends to be a little more opaque. What they want to say is, I bought product X, give me the SBOM for product X, or you're running application Y as part of a SaaS, give me the SBOM for application Y. So application groups are a capability within Anchore Enterprise, which allows you to group several sets of SBOMs together. So to pick this source code, this container image, or these multiple container images, which maybe represent your front end, your back end, middleware, to group those together into an application group, and then download the complete set of SBOMs for all of the content within that application group. So a very convenient feature to allow you, again, and you can automate the extraction of this or the publication of this data, allows you to sort of publish a deployment-centric view of your SBOMs rather than more of a artifact-centric view. So again, depending on what your 3PAO advises you, this is an additional capability to generate the SBOMs. Okay, so we had a checklist of 5 areas for 6 controls, plus the bonus one of doing the SBOM generation, which you get for free in essence by using Anchore Enterprise. So just some last tips that we try to emphasize when we work with our customers here, which is trying to implement as much of this in CI as possible. The sort of shift left concept applies to compliance as much as it applies to sort of security in general. So fix your vulnerabilities, look for violations, whether they're STIG violations or the vulnerability ones, get that done in CI first. You're still going to have to do it later in production, but the more you do in the left-hand side, the better. Automate both the, ideally the generation of the report information, the compliance evidence, as it were, auto-generate that using our automation processes where you can schedule when this data gets published. Ideally manage your POA&Ms centrally in Anchore. Again, You can connect that to GitHub if you want to do it there, push it down, but Anchore can be your central location of all of the POA&M information around your container images, and use allow lists to, again, automate the workflow around that. And finally, and this is often the hardest one, where security teams don't have a huge amount of influence over the development team sometimes, but practicing good hygiene around how content is stored and generated and archived is often your most important sort of practice. If you are asked to generate a FedRAMP document for all of the assets you have within your registry, that can be an awful lot. So good quality archiving out, good quality structuring of your registry, and ensuring that, similarly, it's connected with your runtime inventory, so you have that sort of a cross comparison between what's actually running and versus what's not. The more effort you put into structuring your registry processes, the easier it is to generate the data later on. Okay, so I think that was it for the presentation. I think we have some time for Q&A if there are any other questions. Otherwise, I'll let Brandy take us home, but let's see if we got a few minutes to answer your questions, either to Mike on some of what's going on in FedRAMP and SSDF more generally, or specifically on Anchore Enterprise.
Yeah, I haven't seen any questions roll in, but here's one.
Yep. Is STIG check part of the FedRAMP policy bundle? So no, so the not yet. So our STIG checks, as I use the phrase companion, which is it's essentially a side car, sort of, not in a Kubernetes sense, but it's like a sidecar to Anchore Enterprise, where we have a separate set of tools which you can use, excuse me, either within CI or in the runtime world to extract all the results of a STIG check. You can browse them in an interface which looks very similar to Anchore Enterprise. We are evaluating options for unifying that later. But this is much more the automation of the generation of the STIG data is what the tools are mainly focused on, which can be quite cumbersome and challenging for folks. Is how do you automate the collection of this data from your runtime environment in particular. So at the moment, these are separate tools you instrument in your either pipeline or production environment. But yes, we are evaluating options where we can unify that as a single workflow with a single set of reporting data, which you can extract for both STIG as well as all the other FedRAMP controls.
Looks like Tom come in with a question as well.
Is Anchore affected by the FedRAMP move to OSCAL? I'm not sure I'm able to answer that question, actually.
Right. So OSCAL is the automated format that the SSP and the POA&M is going to be provided to FedRAMP in the future, as FedRAMP is moving that way. I believe FedRAMP isn't quite ready for OSCAL yet. They're moving that direction. In my work with Neil, it appears that that's the direction they're going with the API integration with an OSCAL tool. It would be capable of ingesting via an API the information from Anchore into that type of format, if that makes sense, Tom.
Yeah. So I mean, just a key part of the Anchore design is everything's API driven. It makes it we're not locked into any sort of GUI based workflow, GUI based formatting. It really is like we have all the data. We want to give you access to it in as flexible a format as possible. So new formats tend to not be too much of a challenge for our system. Is there a link you guys can share that details more around requirements for FedRAMP and IL4 with SBOMs? Yeah, we do have some. If you go to, Brand, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we have a resource page at anchore.com/SBOM or SBOMs, I think it's SBOMs plural, where we have a bunch of information around SBOMs in general. We do have a FedRAMP page as well, but yes, it is. Well, I'll let Mike say, maybe answer this in more detail. It's very fuzzy at the moment, and it's an ongoing conversation. But Mike, I don't know if you've got any.
Yeah, and one of the
specifics.
things, and I'm sure there are going to be some links. Brandy, I believe you're going to provide them at the end. InfusionPoints actually partnered up with one of the authors of the SSDF, Karen Scarfoni, and we did a blog series on that. So one of the links is to at least one of the blogs on the InfusionPoints site where we dive into more detail. We point to all the resources for SBOM, and as it evolves on our site, we're always going to keep that updated.
Yep, and just to we Anchore can work with we work with IL4 up to IL6 environments, so we're set up for both levels, and we've done a fair amount of work with various national security teams around those requirements. So. Okay, I think unless there's any other questions, Brandy, I'll let you. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you everyone for weighing in. Sareem, I just dropped that link in the chat box for you there. So that's a wrap, folks. Please feel free to, that's the end. Okay, so we're good. Everyone, you can watch for emails in your inbox where you get a recap of today and the slides, and please do reach out with any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Brandy.
Thanks, guys.